Brought to you by concordiatheology.org, bringing you resources that support the vigorous life of the mind in service of the gospel of Christ.
Welcome to Lectionary Kickstart. We're sparking your thoughts for Sunday as you plan your sermon or teaching lesson. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordelot, here with Dr. David Schmidt and Dr. Peter Nafsker. They're both professors of homiletics here at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. You can hear all about us in our introductory episode, but trust me, they're pretty good preachers. All right, let's get started. Peter, where are we in the church year?
We're at the 17th Sunday after Pentecost and continue to think about the church and her mission and the Spirit of God that continues to lead us to the world.
And what are the texts this week, David?
Habakkuk 1, 2 Timothy 1, Luke 17, and Psalm 62.
As always, I ask each of you to tell me which text you would choose to preach about. To determine who goes first, in the epistle reading, it's the Eunice and Lois verse, right, where Paul said to Timothy, your faith first started in your mother and your grandmother, and now it's living in you. What is the first name of a person that influenced your faith growing up?
Well, I'll just go with a grandma since Paul went with a grandma here. Lois, my grandma, I have two grandmas, Esther and Dorothy, and they both were very influential in different ways. Esther, my dad's mom, was kind of a quiet, rock-solid pillar faith. My grandmother Dorothy, my mom's mom, was this incredible cook who was very cheerful and would just effuse the generous love of God through her cooking. And so they both were, and they both talked about Jesus too, but they both kind of embodied something different about kind of passing on the faith, I guess.
Mine would be Joyce, my mom. You know, she used to help me learn to sing hymns, so that was fun. Yeah.
When I was little, my parents were not connected to a church. And so my dad's mom, my grandma on that side, her name was Gertrude. She was a very strong Christian woman, very strong Catholic Christian. And so she taught me how to pray because we didn't pray at home. And so she's like, oh, Jessica, you fold your hands like this. And she taught me a table prayer. And then my parents became Christians. It was an amazing conversion. It changed like the home that I lived in, and they're passionate about their faith. And so afterwards, like my parents, you know, George and Liz, man, you both picked great ones. That's hard to pick. I'm going to go with Peter because he said a grandma first.
Here, too.
Okay, I'm going to suggest, I'm thinking about preaching a sermon on Luke chapter 17, the gospel reading. And kind of before I have you read a little bit of it, let me tell you about what I did this weekend. This weekend, my son and I watched one of those Mission Impossible movies. I mean, he rides a motorcycle off a cliff
right,
with a parachute, and then at the right moment flies through a moving train's window to kick the gun out of that guy's hand.
Oh, I know.
That's ridiculous. That's really silly.
And so all weekend, my son was talking about how this is so ridiculous. That never could have happened. And I kept saying, well, it's Mission Impossible. That's the point.
That's good.
And so we've been kind of having that inside joke all weekend. And it's the ridiculous nature of what happens in that movie that maybe was lingering with me when I looked more closely at this text, because frankly, some of the stuff in this text is, well, it's impossible. I mean, it's just not possible. So to get to the heart of it, Jessica, would you read Luke 17, verses 3 to 6?
Pay attention to yourselves. If your brother sins, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times in the day, and turns to you 7 times saying, I repent, you must forgive him. The apostles said to the Lord, increase our faith. And the Lord said, if you had faith like a grain of mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it would obey you.
All right. Now, there's some impossible things going on in this text.
Right?
And so I want to try to take seriously what Jesus says here, but to do so, I think it would help to get a little bit into the context. So just we've been reading through Luke during this season, and at this stage in the gospel, Luke 17, Jesus turns to his disciples. He's been talking to the Pharisees for a while. and telling some parables and doing some pretty harsh teaching. And now he turns to the disciples, and he says this thing about, it's temptations are sure to come. He's talking about the difficulties, and then he says this thing about forgiveness. If your brother sins against you 7 times in the day.
Yeah, that's the killer.
7 times in the day? It's hard enough one time or 7 times in a lifetime. But 7 times in the day? I mean, that's incredible. And so what I think about for a sermon on this, before we even get to the mulberry tree, what I'm thinking about is that phrase that the disciples, the apostles said in verse 5, increase our faith. That's a really interesting phrase. And actually, I did just a little bit of looking at the Greek, at the specifics of that phrase. And it's actually, there's actually a number of ways you can translate that phrase. And I don't know, Dave and Jessica, you got to help me here. I'm not sure if I'd want to organize a sermon around different ways to translate a phrase. So
I think there might be a question in the Jessica jar about that.
Yeah, maybe so. But I think you might be able to do this, okay? And in doing so, name for your hearers the experience of being a Christian and being called to trust things that are impossible. And also help people be honest about the difficulties in their lives. Okay.
So are you thinking of exploring this, different ways to translate it? Or?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how explicit I would be on this, but so maybe let me share with you kind of what I'm thinking in terms of three kind of rhetorical units, 3 moves, and see if it might work for a sermon. Okay. So the first, in the ESV, the apostles say, increase our faith. Okay. And the idea here is, we believe, but we need more. Increase it. We already have faith. We believe. So I'm thinking about this thing about forgiveness, right? Okay, we believe we're forgiven. We're called to forgive others, even up to 7 times.
In a day.
In a day. And I can imagine the disciples kind of being a little bit like the father of that demon-possessed man in Mark chapter 9, where we always love to quote that, I believe, help my unbelief. Yeah. And so that would be kind of... I can imagine myself saying, increase our faith, increase my faith, Lord. I know I need to forgive, but I'm having a hard time.
I really like the way you're talking about this, because you've got so many people who have people in their lives that they struggle with forgiving. I mean, it's not like it happens instantaneously, and helping naming for people that difficulty of forgiving somebody. Just once, much less 7 times a day. But how difficult that can be, I think people will really resonate thinking about, that person I'm struggling to forgive. And one way of responding it is to say, increase my faith.
Yeah, and that would take seriously. Again, like I mentioned, the whole point of the sermon, I think, would be to try to be really honest with your hearers and with yourself, frankly, about how hard the words of Jesus are. We've talked about this before. I think sometimes Jesus is hard because he's hard to understand. It's hard to comprehend. Sometimes what Jesus says is hard because it's really clear.
Right.
and this is one of those where it's really clear what he's saying.
Yeah, you can't get out of it.
There's no way out of it, and that's what makes it so hard. So the first idea would be just take it kind of as the ESV translates, increase our faith, and it help the hearers think about how we need to believe more or stronger or firmer or something. But then you look at what Jesus says after that, and it kind of blows that possibility out of the water, because he says, if you had faith like a grain of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted into the sea, and it would obey you. Okay, now we've gone from the realm of possible. Maybe on my most generous day, I could forgive somebody even maybe 7 times. But then Jesus says, well, if you actually believed, you could uproot this tree and plant it in the sea. Now that's impossible. And this next phrase of Jesus, I think, exposes us for people who don't believe, who can't believe. So the second way you could translate this, actually, and this is BDAG, the Bauer, Danker, Arndt, and Gingrich lexicon.
Okay, Paul, just come on. What is that? You're not going to use that word in your sermon, are you?
No, don't.
I'm just
do
making
that.
sure. All right.
No, good.
Go ahead.
But they say the language here would be grant us faith. I really hesitate to make a big deal of translations in a sermon,
right?
Because I don't ever want to give people the impression that one's right or one's wrong. Mm-hmm. And so what I really want to do in the sermon, if I go here,
tell me more about that.
Well, people have really good translations. We've got wonderful translations of the scriptures that are so helpful, and I get concerned when pastors too often highlight what they would translate differently, because then it instills a lack of confidence in the translation that their congregation is hearing and reading and maybe is memorized.
You tell me go home and read my Bible. Why should I? You just told me my Bible doesn't say what it really says.
I think actually the way you can get at this is to say it's not like one of these translations is right or one wrong. It's kind of a
different nuances.
Different nuances.
Right.
And so the first nuance would be that we believe, but it's weak. It needs to be strengthened. But here, as soon as Jesus says you're going to uproot this tree and plant it in the sea, I would say, Lord, give me any faith. Grant me
that faith.
I mean, I want to believe this. I like the idea of believing it, but that's really hard to believe. It's like the Mission Impossible. That's not actually possible. And so I can imagine the disciples here saying, "Oh, what are you talking about? How is this even possible?" What I like about this idea, at least, is that I think it gives you a chance to be very honest. Because I think there's a lot of people who really struggle to believe, who they'd love to say, increase my faith, but they kind of want to say, just give me any faith.
Just give me faith, yeah.
And I mean, you think about believing that God's actually in control of things, or believing that my life matters, or believing that all things will work for good for those who are called by God. These things are, sometimes I wonder, I can't hardly believe these things. They're too good. And so, but here I want to address the congregation and name their struggle to believe, period, by helping them recognize that they're in good company. The disciples here are saying, either increase or grant us faith. Whatever they said here, or whatever they meant here, it's pretty clear that the disciples did not believe in the end, and their reaction to Jesus' death, I think, is evidence. Nobody believed in the end that he was actually going to rise, and everybody fell short in that way. And that's when you start thinking about the unbelief of the people God has chosen. I mean, you think about what did Jesus do to the disciples who all scattered and who didn't trust his promise to rise? Well, he called Mary by name. He brought peace to the disciples. He ate and drank with the disciples on the road to Emmaus. He sent them to do impossible things like forgiving sins. We can't do that. We can't forgive sins. Only God can forgive sins. But after his resurrection, Jesus met these disciples, these followers, in their lack of faith, and still sent them to do things that, frankly, they could never do on their own. He gives you his peace. He eats and drinks with us. He sends us to forgive sins, even as he has forgiven us. So the gospel could be really strong in here, in this section. But then there's also actually a third way you could translate this, and I didn't see anybody actually go this direction. The two commentaries I looked at didn't mention it. Increase our faithfulness. And so think about these three different: increase our faith, grant us faith, increase our faithfulness. So I think you'd kind of be leading a congregation to pray these kinds of things. Lord, give us faith. Lord, increase our faith. Lord, increase our faithfulness.
Right.
And have that be kind of help people acknowledge that we're all kind of works in progress according to our sanctification.
Thanks, Peter. And now it's time for the Ask Jessica jar, the time in the show where we pick a question from the jar and I answer it from the perspective of a person in the pew. All right, Peter, pick a question.
What might be the response of a teenager in the pew?
for them to hear Jesus say, if you had faith, you could move that tree. I remember thinking, I'm going to try. I have faith in Jesus. Jesus can be, I'm going to see if I can move that tree.
I could use you in my backyard.
It never worked. Now, that's when I was not a teenager yet when I thought that. But I'm glad that you talked about that, because otherwise, maybe it's a test. And if I can't move that tree, maybe I don't have faith, and maybe this whole thing just isn't quite right.
Yeah, and this is where a sermon like this, I think, when people struggle to believe, the way to help them believe is not to tell them to believe harder.
Right.
But to preach the promises of God even more fully
that they
and
believe
clearly,
in.
that they would believe. And so that would lead a little bit of a pointing away from yourself and your inability to move the tree and point toward, like David, you mentioned, kind of toward the love of God that makes all things possible.
Right. That gives faith, that increases
right.
It increases faithfulness. Yeah.
All right, David, it's your turn. What text would you preach about?
Well, I would preach from Habakkuk.
Habakkuk.
I haven't heard many of those.
I know, and I was wondering, I wish I had. I should have looked it up in the lectionary and see how often Habakkuk is used.
Not very often.
I don't think so.
I think this is the only time in 3 years, unless you go with like there's some festivals that.
Right. So in Habakkuk, and they kind of cut the text in pieces so you miss the give and take, because it's kind of Habakkuk is having this really difficult, painful conversation with God. And often we think about prophets as these kind of almost stoic figures, and they have the word of the Lord, and they just go and they just say it. And Habakkuk is completely different. He's like, what the heck is going on, God? Why are you doing these things, and why do I have to watch it, and why are you idly watching it? It's very hard questions, and so it kind of opens up for us a vision of a prophet who's struggling a lot with God. And rather than, just kind of, I got this message and here I'm going to tell you. It's a really, Habakkuk in that sense is a very rich figure, but also very painful figure. And for me, it's, I envision, like in terms of the lectionary, you've got this one Sunday where you've got Habakkuk. I envision this being kind of like the moment when you're on the airplane and they're saying, there's these exit doors with a pull down this lever if you need it. And it's a text for emergencies. And for me, I would kind of use the analogy that Habakkuk is kind of about waiting room faith. That if you're in an emergency waiting room, having faith in an emergency waiting room is a lot different than having faith when you're sitting around the table, when you're opening presents on Christmas, when you're, celebrating Easter. Waiting room faith is kind of that emergency moment, and we're going to learn about it by reading this text from Habakkuk. So Jessica, if you could start by reading verses 2 through 3.
O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? Or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise.
If we're using the analogy, you just think about, you've been in waiting rooms. I was with a friend who was dying of cancer, took him in there, and he said, take me out. I can't stay here. It's a really difficult waiting room. And there are waiting rooms where you are surrounded with horrible kinds of suffering, right? Suffering from shootings, suffering from, some types of dementia, suffering from attempted suicides, drug overdoses, cancer, heart attacks. You're in the waiting room, you are immersed in this horrifying suffering, and you're crying out for a doctor to come and do something, but it's a triage and it's not yet. Not yet. You're here, but not yet. It's so there's this cry for help, for God to do something, and Habakkuk is looking at the people of Judah and the Babylonians who are kind of being cast aside and the Assyrians who are going to be coming in. And he's watching as God, the conversation with God is he's like, look at this sin and the suffering within our people. And God's like, yeah, look who I'm raising up to destroy them. And he gives him this horrifying vision. He sees that and he even cries out the more. So you've got this moment in the prophet's life when he sees the sin of the people, he sees the reality of God's judgment. And it's too powerful for him, and he's crying out in lament. So there's this aspect of seeing the pain that happens in a waiting room. And it's real, and we can't cover it up. We can't have, sweet little platitudes that make it all better. They don't. It's painful, and it's real, and that, unfortunately, is part of waiting room faith, is that you're going to be immersed in pain, and it's going to look like God isn't watching, like he's not doing anything, and you're not only going to be angry at the pain you see, but you're going to be angry at God for not doing anything about it. The prophet gives me voice to express this anger and this upset with God. Right, so that's the first thing would be, kind of hard. And it's not a pleasant sermon. I'm sorry about that, but
life is unpleasant sometimes.
Right,
so you preach it.
I know.
But and it names the experience of a lot of people. I mean, Habakkuk was neither the first nor the last to see things going very badly.
Right.
And wonder, God, why aren't you
doing
acting?
something?
Why aren't you doing something
right.
about this?
And then the second thing, Jessica, if you could read chapter 2, verse 1.
I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint.
Okay. I love this. This is that moment when you're in the waiting room and you're like, okay, I thought I was going to come in here and they were going to do something right away. Now I realize it's the long haul. I need to call people to take care of my pet. I need to call people to take care of my kids. I need to let people at work know I'm not going to be there tomorrow. I'm here for the long haul. I'm going to stay, and I'm going to stay here until we get help. I'm not leaving.
There's kind of a stubbornness in Habakkuk here, that I think you could think of as almost a stubbornness of faith.
Yes.
He doesn't turn his back on God and walk away. He says, "I have made my complaint, and I will wait for your answer."
I know, right,
and that in some ways that's a real beautiful image of what faith is.
Right.
That you're clinging to God and refusing to let go of him until he gives you an answer.
Right. I'm not going to go to any other God to get help.
Right.
Because I know you're the one.
Right.
I'm not going to leave this emergency room and try some other place. I'm not going to urgent care.
Right.
I'm not, I am staying here.
So it's not a lack of faith that leads someone to talk like this to
right.
God.
No.
It's actually faith that leads to that.
Right. This presence of faith that God is the one in charge. And I'm going to wait here until you do something. You're not getting rid of me. I'm here for the long haul because I trust you, God. I trust that you're going to do it, and I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to be here for the long haul. So that's the second thing of waiting room faith. And then, Jessica, if you could read chapter 2, verses 2 through 4.
And the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end, it will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come, it will not delay. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by his faith.
So in kind of the waiting room scenario, one of the problems with the emergency room is you don't have access to the doctors, right? But the doctors are back there doing things that are way beyond your understanding. They're doing things that you have no idea about, the things that will bring healing in time. And part of waiting room faith is holding on to the promise that it will happen, but it will take time. It may take an entire lifetime. It may not happen in this lifetime. God does see evil. God is at work to destroy evil, and God will bring about good, but it may not be in this lifetime. But hold on and trust in that. So there's this closing picture of waiting room faith that I trust that there's a doctor back there, a doctor who understands the mysteries of healing and is active and is working, and he sends me the promise that, wait, it's going to happen, but it'll take time.
And now it's time for the Ask Jessica jar.
Obviously, I'm dealing with some really difficult stuff. Is there any caution that you can think of?
I think emergency rooms are traumatic. You might have people in your pews who have been with a friend who died after their ER visit. So the picture is clear, what waiting feels like and how awful it is, but the doctors haven't always been able to fix it.
So make sure that the promise comes through.
Yeah. And maybe saying that God is not like the doctors waiting behind the wall. Like because he can for sure do it. He can heal you.
He's greater than.
Yeah.
Well, not only can he, but he has promised he will. And that's where the gospel promise, both for Habakkuk and for us, is that God will act. It will seem slow probably.
Right.
But God will act, and you can count on that. And in that way, he's not like any doctor or waiting room situation.
Yes. Oh, that's a concrete picture of hope. Well, that's all for today. We have free resources to guide your next step in planning at concordiatheology.org. You should check it out. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordelot. Join us next week here at Lectionary Kickstart, when Dr. David Schmidt and Dr. Peter Nafsker will spark your thoughts for next Sunday. You're not going to use that word in your sermon, are you?
No, don't.
I'm just making sure. All right, go ahead.
Good.